Boys and girls, we're finishing chapter 8 from My Brother Sam is Dead. We're going to rewind a little bit and go to 108. I didn't feel so easy when I thought about the cowboys. Do you think they might be waiting for us? He shrugged. They know we have to come back sometime. The people in Mohegan heard that a drover from Northfield had been shot on the Ridgeberry Road 2 days ago and his cattle driven off. Was he killed? Nobody knew. The report might not be reliable. Anyway, he shook his head. I don't know, Tim. If it snows, we ought to go out the shortest way home. But I don't like going back through Ridgeberry. Well, if it's snowing really bad, maybe the cowboys won't want to come out raiding. Well, there is that, Father said. I didn't say anything more. Neither being raided nor traveling through the snow was going to be much fun. We just pushed on. There wasn't much to do. Mostly I stayed at the head of the oxen and kept them moving. Sometimes Father walked with me, but sometimes he mounted Gray and rode ahead a mile or so. Who's Gray? The horse. Good. He didn't tell me what he was doing, but I knew. He was scouting the road ahead for cowboys. It began to snow just after noon. It wasn't much at first. Just a few light flakes drifting down from the sky. Darn it, Father said. Oh, darn. Maybe it'll stop. No, we're in for it now. We pushed on. 10 minutes later, the sky was full of flakes falling quietly through the air. It was beginning to feel colder, and every once in a while, a quick gust of wind would slash the snow into our faces. It's going to be a bad one, Father said. Well, maybe it'll pass by. I'm afraid not, Tim. He frowned. I think we'd better take a chance and go back by Ridgeberry. I don't think many men will want to ride in deep snow. And by 1 o'clock, it was a real hard snowfall. The wind had picked up, and the snow was blowing into our faces. And the oxen became quite white and wet, and they kept shaking their heads to throw off the snow. We walked along with our heads bent forward to keep the wind and snow from flying in our faces. I tucked my hands in my shirt for warmth. In the middle of the afternoon, we reached the fork in the road. Hold up the oxen, Father said. I prodded them to stop. He stood by the cart, staring around him. There was already 6 inches of snow on the ground, and it was blowing steadily down on us. Miss Rhodes, thank you so much. I'm recording. Just, yeah, if you could just turn it down just a little bit. Thank you. Perfect, thank you.
This is not yours. I don't know what you have up, but this is not.
But it's working. Sound is working from it, so I appreciate it. I don't know why it changed after I shut it down. We could turn off here for Wilton Parish, he said, and then he shook his head. There's no hope for it, Tim. We can't go through this all night. We'll have to push on to North Salem and hole up in the Platts until it stops, and then take our chances in Ridgeberry. I didn't feel very good. My hands were cold, and my face was cold, and my feet were getting wet through my boots, and they were going to be cold too. I couldn't stop thinking about the cowboys. We had just been lucky getting away from them the first time. They were bound to be angry with us now for escaping, and they'd want to hurt us to get even. Can we get an escort through Ridgeberry, Father? I don't know. We'll ask the Flats. The walk seemed to go on and on. The oxen balking and walking in the blowing snow. They kept trying to turn their backs to it, and it took Father walking on one side of them and me on the other to keep them going straight. They blinked and shook their big heads and bawled. It was queer now, how the heavy falling snow muffled the sounds of their bawling. Fighting them all the time was tiring. Several times they just stopped and lowered their heads and stood blinking in the snow. Polar bear groups, go ahead and finish the past bedtime and the art check and your reading counts, okay? And lowered their heads and stood blinking in the snow. And it took us 5 minutes of beating them and cursing them to get them going again. It seemed to go on endlessly. With all that snow pouring down around us, I couldn't tell where we were. We could only see about 20 yards in every direction, far enough to tell when we might be passing a woodlot or a house if it was close to the road, but that's all. But Father always knew where we were. Bear up, Tim. It's only a mile to Green's Tavern and just 3 miles from there. Can we warm up at the tavern? The fewer the people know we're going through, the better. I ducked my head against my chest, and we tramped on. Thank you, Miss Rhodes, so much. It began to get dark. What with the oxen balking so much, we were 2 hours behind schedule. The snow was almost a foot deep, and already the oxen were having trouble on the hills, slipping and stumbling when their hooves would strike an icy patch or a pothole hidden beneath the snow. The darkness increased until it seemed as if we were buried in it. I went on a couple of yards ahead of the oxen to feel out the road while Father wrestled with him alone. We didn't talk anymore except when Father cursed. Finding the road was hard. I would have to keep veering from side to side to touch the rail fences and then make a guess about where the middle of the road was. Looking back, I could just make out the black lumpy shapes of the oxen and the cart, with Father fighting along at their heads. And once he said, "This is Simple's Crossing. Only 2 miles, Tim." 2 miles seemed like an endless distance. But finally, we saw the spot of light, and then the windows shining through the snow. We pulled the oxen through the gate and drove them into the barn. They bawled with happiness. Father went into the house to tell the Platts that we were there. I unhitched the oxen, pitched them some hay, and went into the house myself. There was a great fire burning in the kitchen fireplace, and the smell of Johnny cake and hot gravy. My cousins swarmed around to help get my clothes off. I stripped right down to the skin, not even caring that there were girls watching. And they got me a blanket to wrap in, and a place by the fire, and a plate of Johnny hot cakes, and beans and gravy all over it. And I began to laugh. It felt so good to be warm and to be safe again. That night, my cousins and I slept by the kitchen fire.